Good evening, everyone. I'm Vishal Salsekar, and today we are going to discuss the News Today edition of 24th July. Right? So, in this edition of News Today, we are going to cover 5 main news and along with that, the quick updates. So, in the main news, we have to cover first article regarding the Rajendra Chola's legendary maritime expedition. He was a great ruler as far as the India is concerned, and specifically from the Chola dynasty. We will discuss in detail about him and briefly about the Chola dynasty also. Then there is National Sports Governance Bill. Previously we had discussed about the National Sports Policy. Now we will discuss about the National Sports Governance Bill, that what changes it is introducing. Next article that we are going to discuss about a study which was published, and that is mentioning that the GST is a progressive tax, right? So generally, as far as the income tax and certain other taxes which are the direct taxes are concerned, we are talking about that whether they are progressive or regressive. But then there are studies previously which were talking about that there are issues with respect to GST. Now there is a study that is clarifying that it is moving as a progressive tax. We will discuss about this. Next is about the ICJs, which is the International Court of Justice. Its advisory opinion on the tracking as well as the tackling of the climate change related aspects. Last article in this will be the India's achievement of 20% ethanol blending in petrol, right? So previously we had discussed about that majority of the energy in India is now achieved from the non-fossil fuel based resources, and that is also 5 years ahead of the target. In this case also we are discussing about that 5 years ahead of the target, India has achieved this significant milestone. Then apart from that, we are going to discuss the following quick update, right? So let's start the discussion. The first article that we have to discuss from the perspective of GS paper 1, where the topic is related to the Indian heritage and culture. The topic is about the celebration of 1000-year anniversary of the Rajendra Chola's legendary maritime expedition. Now see, this is a trend of UPSC that whenever there is, let's say, the 100th anniversary, 200th anniversary or 1000th anniversary, these kind of milestones, once government is celebrating or there are certain celebrations going on across the country, at that point of time, maybe UPSC has this tendency to ask the question about that. And when we talk about the Chola dynasty, it is one of the favorite topics of UPSC. And among that also, the prominent Chola ruler like the Rajaraja Chola and his son Rajendra Chola, these are the two prominent rulers of the Chola dynasty which have contributed immensely, right? So we have to discuss about articles regarding this. Now, when it comes to the Rajendra Chola, so the context is that government is now celebrating the 1000-year anniversary of the maritime expedition, and this is coinciding with another festival which is Adi Thiruvatirai festival, right? So this is celebrated in the Adi month as far as the Tamil calendar is concerned. Now, in this particular month, ऐसा नहीं है कि this is for the first time they are celebrating this festival, but this time it is coinciding with the 1000-year anniversary of the maritime expedition of Rajendra Chola. Now, this festival is also celebrated in order to commemorate the contribution of the Shaivites or the Nayanars, which have contributed immensely as far as the Bhakti movement is also concerned. Right. So these are the aspects regarding this festival which is coinciding with the 1000th-year anniversary. Now specifically when we talk about the personality of Rajendra Chola, he was a prominent contributor as far as the Chola history is concerned. Now as you can see that he is also provided with the title of Gangaikonda Cholan or Gangaikonda Chola. Right. So why he is mentioned as the Gangaikonda Cholan or Gangaikonda Chola? Because of his expedition towards the Gangetic plains. So when he moved towards the northward expedition, he defeated a lot of rulers in the northern part of the country and the eastern part of country, and eventually he controlled those particular territories. And then he was provided with this particular title of Gangaikonda Cholan. Right. So the defeater or the controller of the Gangetic region. Now, apart from that, he also framed or he also named the capital city, which was also known as the Gangaikonda Cholapuram, which is there in the present day Tamil Nadu. And even the temple with the same name is there. And that is also part of the UNESCO's World Heritage Site along with certain other temples. Now, regarding the contribution of the Rajendra Chola, when it comes to the maritime diplomacy or the maritime conquest, the Chola dynasty, or we can say specifically to the imperial Cholas, which contributed significantly and immensely. Now, during the reign of his father, who was Rajaraja Chola, during his time period, the Chola dynasty also expanded towards the Sri Lankan region. They have captured substantive area of the northern and the eastern part of Sri Lanka. Now, when Rajendra Chola took over the throne of the Chola Empire, then the dynasty further expanded to different other regions, including the entire region of Sri Lanka, even the region of the Southeast Asia. So there was a prominent kingdom which was known as the Sri Vijaya kingdom of the Southeast Asia, which was situated nearby the present day Indonesia and the associated region. So on that particular region also, this Chola dynasty under the rule of Rajendra Chola had a lot of influence. And even the expedition went further, controlling the regions till China also. So we can say, as far as the maritime power of India is concerned, so Chola dynasty is one such dynasty which was one of the earliest and the prominent maritime power as far as the India is concerned. Later on, we have seen even the Marathas that have progressively taken over as a maritime power. Now we can see in this particular map that how the expedition was there. So you can see this was the region which was controlled by the Chola Empire, right, when the Chola Empire was in zenith. Apart from that, you can see some areas of Sri Lanka, specifically in the northern part, eastern and certain other region which was under the Chola domain. Apart from that, this is the route of expedition. So through the naval route of expedition, he also controlled different region of the Southeast Asia, including the regions of like your present day Andaman and Nicobar Island. And that's why in order to commemorate that, the Sri Vijayapuram is the capital city of the Andaman and Nicobar now. Apart from that, the region of including the present day Malaysia, then Indonesia, and you can see till the China, we are seeing the trace of the expedition of Rajendra Chola. That's why he is a prominent personality. And see, as we are reading the history, we should also be having a lot of awareness regarding what Indian rulers, specifically from the Indian origin, have contributed, and they have contributed immensely. But generally, the books have not covered to that extent. But yes, we have to read that because UPSC is also keeps on asking about these. Apart from that, let's discuss also about the Chola Empire, because whenever there is a context set by, let's say, a personality or an event, or let's say any kind of inscription, the dynasty also becomes very important. So the idea about the Chola dynasty, the previous or the earlier Chola dynasty, we also see in the Sangam time period. So the Sangam age or the Sangam time period, which was mainly from the 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD, which was there in the southern part of country, wahan par bhi we are seeing the Chola. But the imperial Chola is the term used for the later Chola powers, which was under the leadership of Vijayala. So under the leadership of Vijayala, Chola power again re-emerged. Previously, they were a kind of feudatories of the Pallavas, and specifically the region of Urayur, which is the present day Trichy, where they were ruling as a feudatory of Pallava. But then once the Pallava got weakened, after that Chola again resurged, and under the leadership of Vijayala, they became again a prominent power. Now when it comes to the prominent or one of the most significant and the earliest personality in the imperial Chola lineage, that was the Rajaraja Chola. In 985 CE, he took over the throne, and then he started the expansionist policies. He also did the cultural conquest. So the Brihadishwar temple that you are seeing in the present day Tanjore was the masterpiece that was constructed under his reign. Then his son Rajendra Chola, regarding which we are reading the article, he also contributed significantly. So the Gangaikonda Cholapuram was constructed specifically during the time period of Rajendra Chola. Both of them are part of the UNESCO's World Heritage List. Apart from that, let's briefly talk about the local governance. So when we talk about the local governance, so the entire Chola kingdom was divided into mandalams. So you can assume them as the present day states. So different mandalams were further divided into Valanadus, right? So Valanadus were basically the aggregation of Nadus. Matlab, there were small village over the village, or let's say a group of village constituting the Nadus. A group of Nadus is framing the Valanadu, and then the group of Valinadu is framing the mandalam. So present day अगर आप देखो तो these are kind of states, then ये हो गए आपके major divisions, then below the divisions there may be certain towns or the districts, and below those districts there are, let's say, tehsil or the villages, right? So this is a kind of framework that you can assume with respect to the Chola Empire. Now, whenever we have to understand history, there are multiple sources of history. So Uttiramerur inscription, which talks about the administration of Chola, which talks about the local governance of Chola, how the elections were taking place. So this inscription is very, very prominent in order to understand the history of Chola Empire. Now, regarding the taxes, regarding the economic aspects, there were multiple type of taxes, but these were the two prominent kind of taxes or the revenue related things. So first is the Vetti, which was the forced labor. Another was the Kadamai, which was the land revenue. Iske alawa bhi there were a lot of indirect taxes that were prevailing during that particular time period. Lastly, as we have already discussed about the Brihadishwar temple under the Rajaraja Chola or Rajaraja I, then the Gangaikonda Cholapuram, which is during the reign of Rajendra Chola, and another temple which is the Airavateshwar temple, which was under the leadership of Rajaraja II. They combinedly are part of the UNESCO's World Heritage Site list. So UPSC can ask these kind of questions. You can see the questions previously that UPSC had asked the questions regarding, though the great Cholas are no more, yet their name is remembered with the pride due to their highest achievements in the art and architecture. So when we talk about this, we can talk about the Dravidian style of temple architecture, which was started by the Pallava, but then that reached to its zenith during the time period of the Chola Empire. Similarly, another question regarding the contribution of the Gupta period and the Chola period. So you can talk about them. And when there is a context to it, UPSC can probably ask the question regarding this. So this was the article regarding Rajendra Chola. Next article that we have to discuss is about the National Sports Governance Bill introduced in the Lok Sabha. Now, right now, this is introduced in the Lok Sabha. Once it will pass, there may be certain kind of changes that might have been done with respect to the present architecture that we are going to discuss. But yes, still it is very, very important, because a few days back we had seen the article regarding the national sports policy, and from the general studies paper 2, when it talks about the government policies and the intervention for the development of various sectors, sports is one such prominent thing, right? And the misgovernance as far as the sports is concerned, there are a lot of issues already in the public domain, right? So that's why the sports governance at this point of time is very, very important. What do we mean by sports governance? So see, whenever it comes to any specific management of thing, let's say the sports management, right? There are multiple authorities. Football के लिए अलग है, hockey के लिए अलग है, for cricket there is BCCI, and different other bodies are there. For Olympic events, different bodies are there. So when it comes to management of those particular sports, there are many a times that there are corrupting tendencies in these bodies. इलेक्शंस नहीं होते हैं, ग्रीवांस रिड्रेसल का इशू है, राइट? सो इन ऑर्डर टू गवर्न दोज स्पोर्ट्स होलिस्टिकली, इन ऑर्डर टू इंश्योर दैट द स्पोर्ट्स बिकम्स द channelizer for the socio-economic improvement of the country, the sports governance is very, very important, and the robust governance is the need of the hour. So that's why this particular sports governance bill talks about the holistic reforms as far as the sports is concerned. Now, what are the key features of this bill? Let's understand. First, it is talking about the establishment of the national sports bodies. So at the apex level, there will be different type of bodies that will be created. So for the Olympic event, there is the National Olympics Committee. So with respect to the General Olympic that happens after every 4 years, there will be this particular body, National Olympics Committee. This will be responsible for management, oversight, a lot of other things with respect to the Olympic events. Similarly, another body for the Paralympics. So similar to that, there are Paralympics events for the differentially abled people, right? So this particular body will be responsible for the management and the coordination for those events. Apart from that, there will be National Sports Federation and the Regional Sports Federation that will be acting as a nodal bodies for the sports or the management of sports, right? Apart from that, there is another body which is formed like the National Sports Board. Now see, there are different sports authorities that will be needed, right? So there is National Sports Board that is created in order to ensure that if at any point of time there is a need to register any specific body, to manage any specific sport, or to give recognition to that body, so it is the power to the National Sports Board. So it will be formed by the central government. We'll discuss in detail about this board also. So there will be members that will be appointed by the central government in this particular board, right? Apart from that, there is the National Sports Election Panel. So see, the transparency is very important thing, because a lot of issues as far as the sports governance is concerned, because there are a lot of issues regarding lack of transparency, lack of accountability, a lack of grievance redressal. So in order to ensure that there is the sports election panel, so yahan par there will be this particular body will be responsible for ensuring that there are timely elections. So the elected representative, as far as the athletes board is concerned, or with respect to the administrative board, for both the kind of things, there are the sports election panel. Now in this particular election panel, there will be people from having a practical experience of election. What kind of people might be having the practical experience? Like, let's say the former election commissioners, or the people who were serving in those, like the electoral officers, the state election commissioners, or the state election commission members, right? So these can be the member of this sports election panel. Apart from that, there is a sports tribunal. So right now the grievance redressal is another major issue. Lack of grievance redressal, lack of timely grievance redressal, and this takes the entire career of a sports person, right? So in that case, there is the National Sports Tribunal. Now this National Sports Tribunal will be ensuring the fast to track justice to the cases filed against them. It will devise its own procedure with respect to this, and apart from that, it will be a 3-member tribunal. So there will be a chairperson who might be either the Supreme Court judge or the Chief Justice of the High Court. Apart from that, there will be 2 members who might be having the expertise with respect to sports, public administration, sports governance laws. So it is taking into consideration the judicial aspect apart from the sports related aspect. Apart from that, the funding for the administrative functions is taken from the Consolidated Fund of India, and apart from that, the civil courts, once the case is filed in them, the civil court will not be having any jurisdiction. Another provision that is added, that the appeal of these tribunals will lie to the Supreme Court. But previously we had seen that whenever any specific tribunal when the appeal is directly lying to the Supreme Court bypassing the High Court, in 1997 there was a case law which was known as L. Chandra Kumar case, jahan par bola gaya ki if you are trying to bypass the constitutional court, which is High Court also, under the Article 226 of Indian Constitution, High Court also has the power of judicial review. So in that case, those particular tribunals ka jo direct reaching to the Supreme Court is as an appellate matter, first that will lie to the High Court. It was mentioned in the L. Chandra Kumar case. This you can mention also. So right now it is mentioned in this. Jab bill pe deliberation hoga, bill will be passed, maybe a chance that there will be a change in this. Lastly, in this, the bodies will have their own code of ethics, sports policy, the safe policy, grievance redressal. So code of ethics means the international bodies jo uske parallel hai, what kind of ethics they are incorporating in order to govern the sports. Apart from that, the safe sports policy for vulnerable section, women, children, or any other personality might be from the differential background. So there will be the safe sports policy and the grievance redressal that will be ensured. Now the National Sports Board, so there will be this particular board in order to give the recognition to different sports authority. So appointment of the chairperson and member will be done by the central government, right? So they will be appointed by the central government. Apart from that, these must be having certain kind of practical and the special knowledge with respect to the sports, public administration, the sports law, or the related field. Now, what will be the functions of these? The functions include that it will maintain the register of the national sports body. So let's say there are different authorities that will be created that has to be affiliated by this. So in that case, they have to be registered with the sports board. Apart from that, it can timely constitute certain ad hoc administrative bodies or certain other kind of national sports body. Time and again it can frame. Apart from that, it can collaborate with the international sports bodies, its counterpart, coordinate with them in order to host the events and all. Apart from that, it can issue the guidelines in order to comply with the international standards. So whenever there are international guidelines, so this National Sports Board can ensure that its compliance should be done at the India level also. So regarding this also, there are previous year question, no specific PYQ with respect to the sports governance, but yes, there are certain PYQs which talks about that when we try to incentivize the people by awarding them certain monetary thing rather than the kind of things that they are getting as a result of winning in that event, that was asked by UPSC. So let's have a look to this question and try to solve this. Now, this is not directly related to the sports governance, but yes, so to some way or other, these kind of questions are also being asked by UPSC. Next article that we have to discuss is about the National Institute of the Public Finance and Policy, NIPFP study, which calls that the GST regime is progressive. So many a time you might have heard the controversy that is surrounding the GST, that first thing, it is making the taxation system complicated because there are multiple layers, 5%, 12%, 18%, 28%, beyond that also on certain luxury goods, right? Apart from that, it is a destination-based tax as an indirect tax, which is based upon the consumption. So on the poorer also, it is equally incidental, and on the rich also it is equally incidental, right? So ab is case mein there were certain studies that were published. So there was a Oxfam study that talked about that roughly 50% of poor jo hai, that fills more than 2/3 of the GST. That means what this report is saying, that lagbhag 50% population pe incidence hai 66% of taxes ka. Now, this was mentioning that GST is a kind of tax which is hitting more to the poorer. Now, this study by the National Institute of the Public Finance and Policy talks about that no, there is no valid data regarding that. It talks about that GST is a progressive regime. So, progressive regime and regressive regime, what are these? So, basically, progressive taxation regime will be that regime where by increase of income, the tax proportion will be increased. For example, in the case of income tax generally, suppose karo, if you are earning to some amount, if your income increases, then the tax incidence will also increase on you. Similarly, for the corporate tax also, by increasing the revenue turnover, the similar tax proportion will increase. So these are the progressive taxation regime. What is the regressive then? कि जब income बढ़ती है, when the income is increasing, the taxation is ulta decreasing, right? It is not increasing simultaneously. So that is a regressive regime. So that is disincentivizing you for increasing your income. And then there is the proportional tax regime also, means the rate will remain constant. जितना income रहेगा, accordingly चाहे बढ़े या घटे, the tax proportion will remain same. So this is the proportional tax regime. Now this report is saying that the GST is a progressive tax regime, right? Now from the perspective of UPSC GS3, which talks about the Indian economy, issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, employment, these are the aspects which are related to this specific topic of GST. Now, the article does not give that much about the GST as a regime, but it talks about certain data which you can utilize in your answer. So, for example, it talks that roughly the consumption based tax means the taxation which is taken from you as a consumer when you consume certain product. This is the taxation, that 62% of taxation is based upon the consumption. And out of that, the majority portion is coming from the GST. Hence, we have to discuss about the, if there are any kind of issues regarding the GST or the GST regime. Now, why this report is saying GST as progressive? So, it is providing certain data. So, what data it is mentioning? That it is saying that rural areas mein jo bottom 50% hai, they are paying roughly 31% of taxes. Means upper 50 kitna pay kar rahe होंगे, roughly 69%, right? So that means जो Oxfam claim कर रहा था, that data is not correct. Apart from that, when you talk about the urban region, bottom 50% is paying the 29%. Again, similar to that, यहाँ पर 71% in the urban region, which is the upper 50%. And when we talk about the top 20, so top 20 in the rural areas contributing 37% of the GST contribution, and top 20% in the urban area are paying 41%. That means the way progressive taxation regime should function, this is also functioning in that manner. कि अगर आपकी income कम है, तो taxation का incidence will also be lesser. If your income is high, so proportion of taxation will also be high. So this is mentioning that GST is a progressive regime. But apart from that, this particular report also highlights certain issues, not per se issues, but it is giving certain recommendation. So what it is talking about, that it is saying that there are multiple slabs right now. There is 5% for the essential goods, 0% bhi hai, let's say for certain kind of food wala things, the grains and all, jahan par there is no need to put the taxes also, 12%, 18%, right? So multiple slabs provide certain dynamicness to this particular regime, right? Because for the country like India, where the diversity is too much, you can't have only the single tax, which was previously thought that it can be a aspect of GST regime. But then it is also saying that right now, if you are going to increase the taxes on the products which are right now falling under the lower slab wala category, like the 5 to 12% range, if you are going to increase taxes on that, it is going to impact more on the poorer people, because generally in the above this particular limit, 18 or 28% are mainly for those goods which are comparatively costly goods or the luxury goods, right? The higher products, higher taxation will be attracted by those particular products. So if the slab is increased for 5 to 12% wale goods ke liye and taxes agar increase kiye jate hain, so this is going to impact poorer more. So yahan par government have to be cautious. Apart from that, what it is mentioning, it is also mentioning that the 12%. Right now we have multiple layers, right? 5 hai, 0 hai, 5 hai, 12 hai, 18 hai, then 28 also. So it is mentioning that gradually we can reduce. So 12% right now the layer is, we can remove this. Some which are essential can be brought to 5%. Some which might be not that much essential can be brought to the 18% category. So 12% slab ko hum hata sakte hain. So this particular article is giving you certain set of data. Now accordingly you can utilize this set of data in order to write the answer. For example, whenever your question is asking you about the analysis of the GST regime, because 2017 it was laid out, and now there can be an appraisal of this particular GST regime can be asked. So there you can talk about that what is the performance of GST, and here this data will become very, very handy to you. Now how UPSC had asked the question about this in the prelims, once the GST was rolled out, UPSC had asked that what impact it is going to put. Apart from that, there were multiple times means based question was also asked. In the wake of COVID pandemic, it was also asked regarding the GST compensation to the state scheme. And apart from that, with respect to the 101 Constitutional Amendment Act, which is related to the GST, that was also asked in the UPSC examination. So from the perspective of economy, it is important, but sometimes when it is asked from the perspective of government or the public policy, it can be even asked in the GS2 related paper. Okay? So as a topic, as a concept, it is very, very important. The data given can be utilized with respect to the answer. Next article that we have to talk about is that the ICJ delivers landmark decision on tackling of climate change. Now see, climate change is becoming reality, and as far as the UPSC is concerned, whether it is GS1, whether it is GS2, whether it is GS3, GS4, whether it is essay, everywhere you can find the linkage with the climate change. So for example, when we talk about GS1, it is impacting the society, geography related things. When it comes to the GS2, it is governance and public policies, impact on the vulnerable section of society. When it comes to GS3, environment as a topic is directly mentioned, climate change as a theme is the predominant aspect of that, and even GS4 ethical aspect are also associated with the climate change. So this particular topic is talking about a body which is the International Court of Justice, which is also sometimes referred as the World Court. So this can be more predominantly related to the GS2, which is related to the important international institutions, agency and fora, what is the structure, mandate, and also from the perspective of GS3, which is environment and the climate change. So let's have a discussion regarding this. Now, just try to assume that who is going to get impacted worst as far as the climate change is concerned, whether the poorer people or whether the richer most people. Obviously, it will impact poor people more. And when it comes to the countries, whether it is going to impact more on the developed countries or developing and the least developed countries, the answer will come the least developed countries, because they do not have that much capabilities in order to counter the issues produced by the climate change. And when it comes to the small island nation, which are hardly a few meters above the sea surface level, agar thoda bhi sea surface level badhta hai, there are chances that those nation state might be submerged. So there are many nation state. So what happened actually, that there were certain concerned citizens from the state of Vanuatu, they reached to the government ki bhai dekho, the climate change is going to impact a lot on the demography, a lot on the geography. So we have to take certain specific action. We have to take into cognizance that the developed countries which are spreading more carbon dioxide or the greenhouse gases, we have to, or we should be trying to reduce that particular emission. So in that case, Vanuatu ne ek advisory opinion liya with ICJ, and then Vanuatu also convinced other countries of the United Nations General Assembly, and those countries की वजह से there was a resolution that was adopted in United Nations General Assembly in 2023 regarding a advisory opinion from ICJ that what should be the future of the issue of climate change. Because the countries are emitting a lot, right? So in that case, what they had asked about that what international laws are saying regarding that, and whether there can be any kind of binding commitments that we can expect from the state countries or from the countries which are propagating the issues of climate change, right? So UN General Assembly का एक resolution pass होता है, and then UN General Assembly ask for the ICJ's decision regarding this, that can there be any kind of binding decision from the ICJ regarding this specific issue, and whether there will be any kind of legal consequences if the emission is increasing and the countries are not countering that. So what are the key aspects that were highlighted by ICJ in this regard? First thing that ICJ has mentioned, that the clean, healthy and the sustainable environment is a part of human rights. When it comes to the Indian Constitution, you might have heard of that Article 21 interpret the right to life and liberty, including right to live in a environment which is pollution free, right? So in that specific case, clean, healthy and also the sustainable environment is also part of the human right. Now the countries in 1948 have adopted in the United Nations a resolution regarding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, UDHR. Now, as per that particular declaration, what they had mentioned, that the countries are now legally bound to adopt the practices which are preserving the human rights, or basically the countries have to uphold the human rights. Now, in this case, this can be legally binding from the human rights perspective. Another perspective that was provided in the ICJ ruling, that the states are obliged to limit the emissions. How come? Because see, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was adopted in 1992 after the Earth Summit, in that also there were certain commitments that were emerged from different countries. After that there was Kyoto Protocol, जहां पर developed countries ने specific commitment किए regarding reduction of the greenhouse gas emission. Then 2015 में we had the Paris Agreement, where the countries have agreed to limit the emission of the greenhouse gases in such a way that the global temperature should not rise beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius of the pre-industrial revolution level. So matlab we should be preventing that particular level should be reached by, right? So in that case, what you can suggest, that since there are different protocols, so this also puts the countries on the legal obligation to reduce the emission. Now, what are the consequences that United Nations General Assembly का एक question हो सकता था कि what will be the consequences? So ICJ said कि there will be a legal responsibility. So legal responsibility में they have mentioned that the countries are obliged to reduce that emission. अगर नहीं emission को reduce करते हैं, there may be certain kind of penalties, there may be certain kind of commitment that the countries से हम sort करेंगे regarding how they are going to proceed with this. And eventually अगर countries नहीं मानते, there will be at least a pressure that is created that yes, you are responsible for more and more greenhouse gas emission. So the countries may also required to offer the guarantees that right now what emission they have done, they should be reducing that over a period of time. So there will be some commitment. So this will be putting country into the spotlight in order to provide the commitment to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Right now, again, it is not clearly penalizing countries directly, but yes, there might be certain mechanisms that may be sought after this, at least the pressure. Because generally developed countries after this said कि नहीं, we are not bound by this, whatever ICJ is saying, and we are not going to reduce because of this particular kind of observation, right? So at least this will show that those countries which are serious regarding the climate change prevention related efforts and who are non-serious aspirant, right? Now, what is ICJ? It is also known as World Court. Now, 1945 में it was established by the UN Charter. The headquarter is at Peace Palace, which is at the Hague, Netherlands, right? Now there are 15 judges, 9-year terms are there, and then they are elected by the General Assembly and the Security Council. Both are involved in the election. Two type of cases are there. First is the legal dispute, which are submitted by the state parties, right? And then those are contentious in nature, and the ICJ is providing solution to that. Apart from that, there may be sometimes the advisory opinion, that on certain issues the countries or the nation state may seek the advisory opinion. But the limitation is that country have to file for the kind of advisory opinion they want to solve, right? Now UPSC can ask the question about this, and even in the PSIR, this is one such favorite topic. So those who are listening to this from the PSIR background, ICJ can be asked regarding the examination, right? Last article in the main news is the ethanol blending, right? So India achieved the target of 20% ethanol blending in the petrol 5 years ahead of the schedule. So 2025 mein when we have achieved, what was the target initially when the national biofuel policy was adopted? So it was 2030, and 2022 mein ek amendment kiya gaya where we have taken the aspirational target of achieving this 20% ethanol blending by 2025-26. So we have achieved it in 2025 only. So this is going to reduce the import of the crude oil, because see, India is a import dependent country for the crude oil. Roughly 85% of India's crude oil is imported from different countries. Now suppose karo, out of that 85%, if we are blending 20% ethanol in that petrol, means we have to now reduce our import. Matlab have to nahi, but we will be able to reduce our import. We will be not that much dependent upon import, because 20% out of that 85% is being contributed by the ethanol when we blend that. So ultimately it will be reached to that volume only, but the import can be curtailed now. So our overall dependency is reduced. Apart from that, the money which we are giving to the countries in order to import that oil, that can also be saved. And this is the data that is showing that the money is getting saved in this. Now from the examination perspective, GS3, economic development, environment, energy, this is a prominent topic. Now, what is the ethanol blending? Basically, see, in that context, ethanol or the ethyl alcohol is simply, you can assume that it is produced from the biomasses. So it is a kind of alcohol, right? So that can be blended to petrol, and that makes the petrol further efficient also, and that will be reducing the content of the petrol, and basically 20% is now blended as your ethanol, right? Now in that case, how that biomass say ethanol is getting obtained? So there can be a natural process. So through the fermentation process, by including the fermentation of the sugars by yeast, that can be done. Apart from that, there are petrochemical methods or the petrochemical synthesis that can be used, or the processes that can be used in order to obtain that ethanol. Now when we are producing that ethanol within the country, it is employing a lot of people also in those industries. So it is giving employment also, it is generating revenue also, because when you need ethanol for blending with petrol, you will need more quantity of ethanol, and then there you have to expand that, you have to spend more on the technology for that, and eventually this will become a economy in itself. So the program was launched in 2003. It is not a new program, but then that point of time, the target was for 5%. Then eventually it increased to 10% and then 20%. So national policy on biofuel was adopted in 2018, and 2022 mein jab amendment kiya gaya, in that amendment it was mentioned that the 20% blending jo hoga, that will be achieved by 2025-26. Now, which all category of product can be utilized to produce the ethanol? So the sugarcane juice, sugar beets, cassava, damaged food grains, potatoes, and other than that, other food crops which are not fit for the human consumption, that can also be utilized. So matlab, we are producing ethanol but not at the cost of food security. This was a major apprehension कि food crops may be diverted for the ethanol production, but government ने बोला ऐसा नहीं है. Those which are not fit for the human consumption, generally हम उसे use कर रहे हैं, or let's say the waste products, right? So the surplus food grains to be used for ethanol production, surplus only, right? So this is the case. Apart from that, what are the achievement regarding this? So first, it has increased because you will need more ethanol. So there was increased production of ethanol in this case. So 38 crore liter to 660 crore liter in 2025. Then obviously when you will need to import lesser oil from the outside countries, it will save the forex. So 1.36 lakh crore was saved as a forex. Apart from that, now see, you will need more and more food crop. You will need certain category of food crop, let's say the sugar cane, or let's say any other product which is having more starch. So you will hire more and more farmer, or you will incentivize farmer. So now 1.2 lakh crore were paid to the farmer. So farmers are also getting flourished because of this, and even the government, which is getting the ethanol as a byproduct. And then it is also impacting or reducing the carbon dioxide emission because it is making petrol further greener resource. So 700 lakh tons of carbon dioxide roughly has been reduced because of this. Now, what are the measures taken for the ethanol blending? So there was interest subvention scheme. So you will need some technology for that. Generally companies takes loan. So there will be interest subvention that is provided, that was started in 2018. Then the GST on the ethanol was lowered so that the cost will be reduced. Again, in order to make sure that ethanol is competitive, you have to make sure that the cost should be reduced. So 18% से 5% वाले slab में we have put. Now the new resources like the sugar syrup that have been incorporated. Apart from that, the food crop which is above surplus level that can be utilized. Then the Industry Development and Regulation Act में बोला गया कि the center and the state government will provide the ethanol supply to the industry so that there will be constant supply of ethanol, so that there should not be any kind of constraint. And lastly in this, the approval for the National Biofuels Coordination Committee. So in entire supply chain, there will be a coordination committee needed. So the National Biofuel Coordination Committee that is basically set up in this case, and then that is utilizing certain other crops. For example, this provided the regulation for the utilization of maize crop for creation or generation of the biofuel. Right? So multiple benefits. The question can be asked in the UPSC regarding the benefits of achieving the target 5 years before. The cost will be reduced. The greenness of the petrol is comparatively on the higher front, right? Apart from that, import can be curtailed. Farmer can be more incentivized. Like this, you can frame your own mental map regarding this, right? So there are multiple benefits. Now there are certain quick updates. Let's quickly discuss those particular updates. The first in this series is the Financial Conditions Index, right? So this is basically an index that was proposed by RBI, or that study of RBI proposed the construction of the FCI for the India to track the market trends. So basically hota kya hai, how you are going to assess that whether the market is favoring more for the development, giving loans, or generation of the economic related aspects ko बढ़ा रहा है या कम कर रहा है, right? What are the conditionalities? What are the market sentiments? So to assess this, there is the Financial Conditions Index. So now what this particular index is doing, so this assess the degree of the relatively tight or the easy financial market. Tight financial markets means the kind of expansion of the industries, taking more loan, giving more lending to the industries, that is comparatively constrained. And the easy or the loose financial market, jahan par it is comparatively easy to get, means the industries are comparatively flourishing in this case, right? And the reference for this is taken as the 2012, right? Now, there are 5 types of market that are brought under its ambit. The money market is there, then the government security market, corporate bond market, forex market, and the equity market. Now, on the basis of what parameters? Based upon, let's say, the interest rate. What is the interest rate? What is the forex exchange rate? What is the kind of ease of doing business? What are the market sentiments? Based upon that only you are able to assess that whether the market is adopting the tight financial market policies or the easy financial market policies, right? So higher positive value shows that it is the tighter financial conditions, right? So you can have a brief idea regarding this. Next is the India Skills Accelerator Initiative. So there is a ministry for the skills, which is the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, along with the World Economic Forum, which is a kind of deliberative body. They are deliberating on the India Skills Accelerator, right? How there can be further enhancement of the skills as far as India is concerned. So what are the objective of this Skills Accelerator, which is a joint initiative of the or which is a deliberation which is going on as a joint initiative of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and the World Economic Forum. What are the objectives? First, it is ensuring that the career transition can be smooth. So for example, if there are more opportunities in certain sector, there should be higher mobility to that. So the career transition can be easy. Apart from that, scalable training. So there will be certain trainings which can be provided in order to ensure that the scaling in the industries can be easy, and those kind of skills can be provided. Apart from that, it will align the education with the industrial need, because maybe a chance that right now whatever theoretical knowledge you are providing, that might not be necessarily needed for the industries. What for industries you are needing? Let's say for the cyber security awareness, sustainable development, green energy, maybe the artificial intelligence. These are the specific industry need. So basically we will align the training or the skilling program with those industrial need. Apart from that, the platform structure will be like that there will be public-private collaboration in this regard in order to achieve these key objectives. Lastly, it is the part of the World Economic Forum's reskilling revolution. So World Economic Forum is supporting a lot of skilling initiatives. So usi direction mein this is also part of that reskilling initiative. Next is the Artificial Intelligence for India 2.0 program. Now see, one such issue with respect to the artificial intelligence, maybe technology or anything, that generally it is hindering to the people who might not be from the sound background of English, right? So this is hindering certain kind of technological adaptation, and when those kind of learnings are not available in the vernacular language, then it further becomes difficult for the people coming from the rural background or non-English background to get the knowledge and the awareness regarding that. So what this Artificial Intelligence for India 2.0 program is doing. So Ministry of Skill and Development and Entrepreneurship has informed that now this program is enabling the learning of artificial intelligence and the associated technologies in 9 vernacular languages. Means the language is no more a barrier. The major language that are spoken in the country, like the Hindi, Telugu, Kannada, like these particular language will be incorporating the programs of artificial intelligence machine learning. So now those people who might be, because of the background, are not having an idea about that how they are going to get the awareness of the artificial intelligence and machine learning, now they can also be part of this. So what will be the key sectors which can be targeted? So the youth which are right now in the colleges, the freshers who just got pass out from the colleges, those who are from the rural background, now not having any kind of basic understanding of English and they know about the regional languages, right? So those can be the target audience regarding this particular program. Now this is providing the free online training with respect to artificial intelligence, machine learning, right? So what it is ensuring? Tech skills accessible and inclusive. Means the language, the kind of socio-economic background should not remain a hindrance in order to adapt the technological solutions, right? Next is about the power market coupling. So the context is the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission has directed the power market coupling will begin with the day ahead market. What is the day ahead market? Means suppose karo there are targets or there are certain things that is going on in the trading, that tomorrow what will be need for that you can do the bidding today only. So जैसे होता है ना forward markets होते हैं कि you can place your biddings, you can place your contract for the buying and selling one day before, so that on that particular day the expectations and the demand will already be clear. So what it is ensuring? That it is ensuring the physical electricity trading market will be allowing the participants to buy and sell electricity for the next day. So एक forward day के context में they will be ensuring the buy, purchase and the sell of electricity on the trading platform, so that there will be a clear idea about that what is the demand and how the policy framers or the formulators can go about matching this particular demand. Now what is market coupling? So generally market coupling is one such thing which talks about that the prices from different nodes should be merged, or there should be convergence of the prices. So what it is doing? So the order from the power exchanges are aggregating, and now there will be matching of those prices, so that what differences right now that are coming from different aggregators, they can be, the difference can be brought down and the uniform price at the aspect of clearing can be achieved. So जो price differentiation आ रहा है by different aggregator, that can be reduced and that can be converged. So this is the aspect of market coupling as far as the power is concerned. So the day ahead जो trading है, which is regarding this, that the buy and sell of the electricity can be done at a day ahead or the forward price, and apart from that, market coupling is in order to ensure the kind of convergence of the prices, right? Next is the carbon border adjusted mechanism. So with respect to EU, this tax was incorporated in order to ensure that whatever goods are arriving in EU are comparatively carbon neutral or having very less carbon content. So the importer which are importing goods from different countries, they have to give certification specifically for these sectors right now, like the cement, aluminum, fertilizer, iron and steel, hydrogen and electricity, which are comparatively more carbon intensive. तो रिगार्डिंग दैट दिस पर्टिकुलर सेक्टर्स में जो इंपोर्टर्स हैं हु आर सिटिंग इन ईयू, दे हैव टू नाउ पे द कार्बन बॉर्डर टैक्स. सो इफ द प्रोडक्ट इज हैविंग carbon content more than the limit that is set for that product, they have to give the tax on and above that particular product. So in that case, just try to assume that the people who are producing even within the European Union, now they are also thinking that हमारी government stringent law लगा रही है regarding the carbon reduction. Now why not to shift to some other countries where the laws are not that stringent, right? So in that case, there are chances that the carbon leakage may become a issue. Means the industries are now setting up their industrial houses in the countries which are having comparatively loose policies. So for that, what European Union is doing, कि whatever taxes they are going to collect through this carbon border adjusted mechanism, so in that particular thing, they are going to compensate those industries जिन्हें लॉस हो रहा है, और they are not making sure that their products are right now more competitive as compared to the product that is coming from the outside world. So simply, this carbon border adjustment mechanism is a kind of tax or a carbon tax which is imposed by the European Union for the goods that are imported in the European Union. Now, in that case, what they are doing, they are providing through this, they are providing incentives to their local industries so that those industries should not shift to any other countries where the carbon laws are comparatively relaxed, right? Next is about chikungunya. So the World Health Organization has issued a warning regarding the chikungunya outbreak, and they have said that this is increasing across the globe, and there are the things which are needed or the steps that are needed from the countries in order to tackle that. Now, whenever there is any specific disease that is in news, you should be having an idea about that, which are the vectors of that disease, what kind of disease, whether bacterial, viral, parasitic, right? And which are the areas and the region which are more vulnerable. With respect to chikungunya, it is a mosquito borne, right? So in that case, it is a viral disease, which is chikungunya virus is the virus for this particular disease. Now the spread is being done by the infected female mosquitoes, which are the mosquitoes Aedes aegypti and also the Aedes albopictus are the mosquitoes that are acting as a carrier also and the infectant for this particular disease, right? Now, right now we do not have any kind of antiviral drug in order to cure this. So the treatment goes like dengue and all other diseases which are having on showing similar kind of symptoms like the chikungunya. However, the government of India has brought down this National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program, which is talking about the prevention and control. Now, the prevention and control, simply they are relying on like wherever you are seeing the water is getting stagnated, remove that. So whichever areas where the mosquitoes can breed, so those particular areas you have to make sure that that area should remain clean. So these are right now the things, and apart from that, prevention is more focused upon and then the control, right? Next is the National Crisis Management Committee, NCMC. So the Ministry of Home Affairs have notified the Disaster Management National Crisis Management Committee procedure rules. So this body was already in existence since 2005, the Disaster Management Act, but this body now got the statutory status by the amendment. So the Disaster Management Amendment Act of 2025 granted the statutory status to this body, which is National Crisis Management Committee. Now this is headed by the cabinet secretary, and other prominent secretaries of different ministries and department are part of it, like the home secretary, defense secretary, etc. Now what is the work of this? So it is acting as a nodal body for what? So if there are any disaster which are having any kind of national level ramification, so for those particular disasters, this body is acting as a nodal body, because at a central level it can act as a coordinating committee or the coordinating body. It will evaluate the preparedness, like we are having vulnerability for this disaster this much, and how much we are prepared in order to tackle that particular disaster. Then for coordinating and monitoring the response, so whenever the disaster strikes, sometimes it happens that multiple states got disrupted simultaneously, so there has to be some coordination, there has to be certain kind of monitoring, right? So all these things have to be taken care of by this particular body, and this is the power and function of this body. Last article for the quick updates is the Henley Passport Index. So in the quarterly ranking of the Henley Passport Index, India's rank has been improved. So previously we had seen that the rank is dipping. Now the rank has been improved from 85 to 77 we have reached. Now how the ranking is being decided? So the ranking in the Henley Passport Index is being decided that how many countries are accepting you as a visa free entrant. मतलब कितनी countries में आपका passport eligible है visa free access के लिए, right? So this shows the strength of your passport. Now see, this goes in a bilateral manner. ऐसा नहीं है कि only the country where you want to go that should be providing you the benefits. Obviously you also have to provide the benefit to that country, then only these kind of mutual thing happens. And this also is not only about the passport. This is also about how diplomatically strong you are. What is your global presence as far as the international acceptance is concerned? So India is growing in this case. Now the travel free destinations are 59. So it has been an improvement of 2 destinations. It was 57, now it become 59. So it is the original authoritative ranking of the world passports, and the number of destination without the prior visa, jitna aap ja sakte ho, that will be the number of country ka number, and then based upon that the ranking is decided. And Singapore, which is having roughly more than 190 countries ka free access, so visa free access, so Singapore holds the first ranking. Now the data for this is from the International Air Transport Association का जो data होता है, based upon that they are identifying, and based upon that the ranking is being decided. Clear? So with this, we have completed the discussion of the News Today edition of 24th July. Now there must be certain questions that are visible to you. Try to attempt that and try to post your answers in the comment also, in order to understand that how you have performed here. Right? So I hope the things are clear to you. Thank you very much.